Welcome, sentient beings. I'm Shamika.
And I'm Jess, and we are Sci-Fi in Real Life.
That's right. This is the show using science fiction stories to help us talk about contemporary tech issues.
And today's sci-fi story is a real blockbuster, Avatar. But first, before we dive in, remember, there will be spoilers. So do not watch this unless you are ready to spoil the show that you should have already watched long ago, because it's actually fairly old at this point. But go watch Avatar, and then 3 hours later, come back and watch our discussion.
Yes. Now, Google describes the film thusly: on a lush alien world of Pandora live the Na'vi, beings who appear primitive but are highly evolved. Because the planet's environment is poisonous, human/Na'vi hybrids called avatars must link to human minds to allow for free movement on Pandora. Jake Sully, played by Sam Worthington, a paralyzed former Marine, becomes mobile again through one such avatar and falls in love with a Na'vi woman, played by Zoe Saldana. As a bond with her grows, he is drawn into a battle for the survival of her world.
So now it is time to introduce this month's ethical dilemmas. And yes, we have 2 today. But first, it's time for the ethical dilemma dance transition.
All right, so the first ethical dilemma that we're going to be talking about is environmental racism. Now, the Na'vi community was destroyed for unobtainium, a superconductor for energy worth 20 million kilo. This aspect of the film Avatar speaks to this real-world issue of environmental racism, where communities of color are destroyed for industrial and technological progress. For our purposes today, I want to focus on the role technology plays in environmental racism, as well as the negative ecological impact of consumer technologies from sourcing to dumping. In an article by the World Economic Forum, examples such as poisoned tap water in Flint, Michigan, toxic waste dumps in the lower Rio Grande Valley, and a town in China where 80% of children have been poisoned by old computer parts are provided as examples of environmental racism. But what is it? The article continues by saying, environmental racism is a form of systemic racism whereby communities of color are disproportionately burdened with health hazards through policies and practices that force them to live in proximity to sources of toxic waste, such as sewage works, mines, landfills, power stations, major roads, and emitters of airborne particulate matter. As a result, these communities suffer greater rates of health problems attendant on hazardous pollutants. It was African-American civil rights leader Benjamin Chavez who coined the term environmental racism in 1982, describing it as a racial discrimination in environmental policymaking, the enforcement of regulation and laws, the deliberate targeting of communities of color for toxic waste facilities, the official sanctioning of the life-threatening presence of poisons and pollutants in our communities, and the history of excluding people of color from leadership of the ecology movements. So what exactly is in our phones and our devices? How are metals and minerals causing conflict? And what can be done about this growing global e-waste situation?
The other half of this month's ethical dilemma is related to the military's use of technology for harmful purposes. In the modern day, technological warfare is not a new phenomenon. From Chinese fire lenses, which were the first guns ever made, to modern day combat drones, we have employed technology in warfare for centuries. So one new path for technological warfare has been met with lots of uncertainty and fear. This is the path of autonomous warfare. The worry here is that eventually drones and land-based or air-based robots will be the ones to take the battlefield instead of humans, possibly even without human supervision. The Campaign to Stop Killer Robots, which was formed in 2012, is a coalition of NGOs that is working to ban fully autonomous weapons to retain meaningful human control over the use of force. And the final piece of this ethical puzzle involves the actors of technological warfare. Though many people tend to believe that the military is the only organization working on creating these kinds of technology, the truth is that some of this technology has been created by private technology companies in secret rooms. Google's work on Project Maven was infamous for just this. And in 2018, employees discovered that the companies had been hiding the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team, who were working on a secret contract with the government to create AI-fueled imaging technology for better drone warfare. And it was part of a larger military-wide campaign to integrate artificial intelligence into battlefield technology. This all speaks to a long history of the military's use of technology for good and for bad, and the people who choose to willingly or unwillingly contribute to it. Both of these sides we saw in the movie Avatar, with those who willingly fought the native Na'vi and those who chose instead to rebel against the military and their destructive warfare.
So let's dive in. There's a lot to talk about here, and I want to start actually with your topic, Jess. So in the film Avatar, you had this military sort of security group of people who were very much structured from the military, people who, like Jake Sully, came from the military to come in to Pandora to take the unobtainium and ensure it got to Earth securely. But in our world, these technologies that we're talking about being used in the military are being used to kill people. They're not being used to protect a mineral or a metal or something like that. The drone technologies, the guns, all of these things are sort of improving upon this method of killing other people, which is very disturbing.
Yeah, and I think this was another piece of this side of the ethical dilemma for this month too, is in the movie Avatar, we see different uses of technology, and some of them were actually not necessarily super bad to start off with. Like the Avatar technology is actually pretty freaking cool. And
Yes.
I think it was originally made just like for scientific purposes so that people could go study the community, study the ecology of the planet, and, study the culture of the Na'vi people, like Grace wanted to do so badly. And then once it started getting adopted by the military, when the Colonel Miles Cortich ends up basically like employing Jake Sully to go utilize this technology that was originally meant for science for infiltrating the Na'vi and learning like where their weaknesses are and how to basically kill them and destroy their home tree. That's super problematic because it's utilizing technology that was never made for bad purposes for a bad purpose, which we see all the time in today's day and age. And this isn't even covering on the fact that like half of the technologies in that movie were built for warfare, like all those huge ships and the helicopters and the guns and all the like metal-based technology that was not built for extracting unobtainium. Like that was built to kill things on Pandora and people on Pandora.
Yeah, like those mech suits are craziness. And I also think that this conversation about sort of what you raised at Google and Project Maven, and when you are that person who has to make the decision, am I going to contribute to what's happening here or not? There were people at Google who chose not to participate, and they spoke up and they advocated for Google to not do that work. So then the question becomes, well, it sort of speaks to this notion that exists around technology innovation. That's like, well, if I don't build it, someone else will, or this kind of attitude. But there is this movement of technologists and software developers and all these kinds of folks called Tech Won't Build It. And it's a growing movement of folks who are choosing not to participate in technologies that are that are not benefiting society, that are actively disempowering people and creating a negative impact in society in some fashion. So, I mean, that's encouraging to see that people like Jake Sully and the other scientists, the pilot for the helicopter who ended up helping them, Juarez, I think her name was in the film. But she was also helpful in getting Trudy or Michelle Rodriguez. So she played Trudy, and she helped fly the helicopter. And when she was in formation, about to shoot down the tree, she was like, "No, I didn't sign up for this." And I think those, like, people at Google, you sign up to help bring the world's data to the world, to people in the world's computers or whatnot, like whatever Google's mission is. But that's what you signed up for. You didn't necessarily sign up to work with the government and military in projects like Project Maven.
Yeah, well, see, I love that you bring up Google's mission, because it's ironic that their mission when they started was don't be evil. And then they were secretly contracting with the government to build warring technology, which I read a few articles on this now, and the Department of Defense, who was contracting with them, is a little bit upset that they lost the narrative here, because they said the technology that Google was contributing to actually wasn't really like warmongering technology, but the fact that their team was called the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team is like a little bit dystopic and terrifying.
Yes, that does not help your cause, you know? Yeah. And the people in Google, because they signed up to just, I don't know, solve math problems and code and work on search algorithms and cool non-evil technology, they were like reasonably pissed when they figured out that Google was secretly contracting with the military. Like, it'd be one thing if Google was really like outright and said this from the start when they were hiring people, but there's a lot of people who are against these technologies who felt like they were contributing to them by working at the company when they didn't want to in the first place. And so that's why in March 2018, when the Google contract with the Department of Defense was disclosed, there were a ton of protests and walkouts that were organized by some awesome people at Google. And it actually led to Google conceding to their demands in June of 2018. And they were going to just let Project Maven, their contract with Project Maven, expire when it ended in March 2019. So this was a case of the workers figuring out uprising and then getting the company to change their practices. But I'm wondering, Shamika, for those who maybe don't know that their companies are doing this, or the companies aren't as responsive to workers' rights, in general, do you think that private tech companies should play a role in the use of military tech at all? Ooh, that's a tricky question. I mean, I feel like there's private companies that have government contracts for all sorts of things. I see a couple different sides to this conversation. One of them is, how do we want to advance the military in terms of innovating technologically? And if so, or rather, we're thinking about whether or not to improve the ability for soldiers in the military to kill people. Like, for example, with drone operators, they changed the video from color to black and white to help reduce the trauma that those operators were experiencing after doing drone strikes. And things like that. But I feel like there's either a Black Mirror episode or something, some sort of sci-fi show where the military has these lenses that people wear that change the enemy into monsters. So it's more like a video game. And in this sci-fi story, it sort of speaks to how if we keep going down the lines we're going, it's going to desensitize and dehumanize. It's going to desensitize the operators and dehumanize the enemies to the point where killing is just going to be too easy. So if the goal in the war, I don't know, because it's like the goal should be peace. The goal shouldn't be being really great at war. But that's a question above my pay grade, so to speak. I feel like there's people who are in positions of power who have to figure out whether or not to go into war, or what does it look like to deploy troops and this kind of thing. Nonetheless, with private companies and the military, I think that it comes down to this notion of there's going to be someone who's willing to take that, secure the bag, so to speak. They're going to take that paycheck, they're going to take that contract and take advantage of it as long as it's being offered. But if the government stops offering it, then the government stops innovating on their technology. Then where does that leave us at? Because other countries, and I think this is a conversation too, other countries are also trying to innovate and incorporate technology and AI into their warfare as well. So it's an arms race, sort of an AI arms race, to try and get these technologies built into the military in a way that will make the difference on the battlefield. So in regards to private companies, I don't know that there is a solution there, or if you as a private company decide not to do it, someone else is going to. So would it be better to have your company, who's maybe considers themselves to be more ethical, more human-centered or focused, maybe that perspective is one that's needed in the room, so to speak. So that's what I think. It's a tough one.
Yeah. I mean, it's a bit of a dilemma, because I don't know how I feel about the private tech companies in general, but like just talking about the topic of like technology being used for warfare, I do feel conflicted. And of course I'm biased, because I'm somebody who just wishes that like we could have peaceful protests and like non-violent peaceful warfare as opposed to, deadly warfare. But you have like technology that exists for, I guess, kind of good in warfare, and that's like armor technology and like detection devices and that stuff that helps like save the troops and keep them safe. And so I'm more inclined to think like that kind of technology is okay to be innovated on by other companies, because it's just like a safety and security technology. But then there's other technologies that are used for like shock and awe tactics that are basically just meant to like annihilate opponents and scare the crap out of like communities that were not asking to be a part of war in the first place. And those kinds of technologies are like, at least in my eyes, super awful. And it reminds me of like, I mean, even if we think about a technology that seems good, like armor, it reminds me of something that happened to one of my friends who was working as a mechanical engineer intern for some company that was contracted by the Department of Defense. And she was working on like a very, very simple part of this like kind of plastic that was going to be created as this like shell casing for this like defensive center that was underground. And like she's one piece of a much larger thing. So of course she wasn't like responsible for the aftermath of everything, but she did have some responsibility in the creation of this kind of plastic. And she discovered that the plastic was actually used to protect the people in the bay, who were the ones where if there was a nuclear war that was ever started, so if somebody tried to send nukes to the US, this plastic needed to be resilient enough from nukes so that the people in the bunker could send nukes back. And so it was a defensive technology. It was protecting the people in that room, but it was protecting them so that they could start nuclear warfare. So it was like a double-edged sword.
Oh, what an internship. Like, I don't know how you put that on your resume. I don't know what that blurb looks like, but whew, goodness gracious.
Yeah.
That's hard. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it comes back to this notion of you as an individual. What do you do if you find that you're working for a company that is contributing to these kinds of technologies? But then also, if you flip the question to the leaders of these companies, or even the military itself, and thinking about what their motivations are, what their driving force is, and why they're making the decisions that they're making, and how could their decisions be more ethical. I'm I would imagine, I would hope that at least the military has advisors who do have the ability to weigh in on the ethics of a situation, or the pros and cons, the benefits, the impact of society. I would imagine and hope that someone has that job, as difficult as it would be, so that there is a voice in the room that is able to say something. Even if it gets shot down, it's something that gets said in the space. So, yeah.
But it's not even just about the military use of technology, right? Or like contracts with the military. Like there's a lot of societal impacts that come from decisions that are made in those boardrooms, or just decisions about the company's mission in general. And one example that comes to my mind is the infamous Apple, and how they're known for just being awful to the world and the environment for all the stuff that they create. And I know, Shamika, you did a little bit of research on this. So like, what do we need to know about Apple and the products that we use, and if it's contributing to the world dying?
So yes, there are a number of materials in things like your cell phone, and things like the laptop, the iPad, the whatever device that you have, that come from all over the world. But things like gold, silver, lithium, aluminum, cobalt, tin, arsenic, tantalum, lead, tungsten, nickel, mercury, and more. Some of these materials are conflict materials. So the conflict materials are tantalum, used in cell phones, DVD players, laptops, hard drives, gaming devices, tungsten, tin, and gold, if they're mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo or the surrounding countries, including Rwanda. So the mineral trade there has fueled bloody conflicts for decades, and it's been a really difficult history of mining and warfare and strife for those communities. So there's two sides of the situation. One of them is the mining and the sourcing of the materials, where if you are someone who is creating a device and you're getting these materials from these conflict areas, it's similar to blood diamonds, right? And so once people started learning about blood diamonds and consumers started demanding that they have conflict-free diamonds, then that changed the sourcing, and that changed the supply chain for that industry. So consumers are just now starting to consider what's in their phones, what's in their computers, and whatnot. And so conflict materials from places like the Democratic Republic of Congo are starting to get diffused, but that's just one side of the spectrum. So on the other side of it, once your device is discarded, which could be for a number of reasons, such as planned obsolescence, or the right to repair movement has pointed out that technology is less and less able to be repaired these days. So back in the day, when your TV got busted, you go to a TV repair shop, or if your vacuum cleaner was on the fritz, you take your vacuum cleaner to the local repair shop. Nowadays, if you got a cracked phone, some people might fix the screen, but there's more and more people who don't get their phones repaired or their devices repaired. They'll just opt to get a new one. So that leads to this increase in both consumption and then discarding of materials, which also it feeds back into the first element of sourcing, when more and more people are buying more and more devices because they're not repairing them, not using them longer, etc. That causes more mining of materials that needs to be done in order to meet the demand. So that creates this e-waste situation on the other side of the spectrum, and this is waste that cannot be this is electronic waste, and the ways that people can combat e-waste include reusing their devices, repairing them, or selling them again, resale. But the options for people doing that, like how easy is it to try and get a refurbished iPhone? How easy is it for you to make sure that your device, if it's still usable, gets refurbished? I mean, these are questions that come up, and as consumers, it's difficult, especially if you're not in the UK. There's this company that created a device called the Fairphone that's actually rated as an ethical cell phone because of the way it's sourced, the way that it's built to be repaired, and the way that they upgrade the phone. You could actually just incorporate new things into the phone you already have, as opposed to getting a brand new device. Or if you do get a brand new device, you can still use all your old dongles or whatever the case. So there are strides being made, but they're in fits and spurts across the world.
Yeah, speaking of the strides, actually, another link we'll put in the description below is for a company that I believe is only US based right now, but maybe they're going global soon, called iFixit, that was actually launched out of the university that I went to for my undergrad, Cal Poly. And they're doing awesome stuff to make guides and instructional manuals for how you can fix your devices yourself, even devices that are really, really difficult to fix, so that you don't pay these crazy fees or just like buy new ones. And their mission is to help lower e-waste worldwide. So I think that is very much in line with what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I've used iFix back when I was working at a charter school as as IT support person to fix Chromebooks.
Nice. Well, so this reminds me of, because one of the ways that I've used iFixit is to try to repair my Apple products, because they are notoriously super freaking expensive to repair. But a few years ago, the Apple laptops changed their hardware so that I think like the motherboard or the circuit board or some hardware jargon is basically like fused into the other elements of the laptop to make it like harder. Like this actually didn't really help with anything in terms of the way that the laptop functions, but it's just to make it harder to repair it yourself so that you have to go in and get it fixed with their fancy tools at the Apple places. And this reminds me of some of the awful practices that just make me hate how much I love Apple products, but just hate Apple in general. And that is a word that you mentioned, Shamika, which is planned obsolescence. And I'm wondering if you can unpack that for viewers, because I did not know this word until I heard it from you, and it is trippy.
Yes. So as the name suggests, planned obsolescence is this notion of design that it allows you to put in place opportunities for your product to fail in a specific period of time. So, for example, outside of cell phones, back in the day, there was, in 1924, there were these cartels between all these different companies that created light bulbs. And they decided that a light bulb would not exceed the expected lifespan of 1,000 hours. So even though the cartel dissolved in 1939, we still have these light bulbs that would plan to fail after 1,000 hours. Whereas we could have light bulbs that last 100 years. There's a light bulb somewhere in the world that's been on for over 100 years. So the notion of planned obsolescence is we want our product to fail so people have to buy another one. We don't want it to last as long as possible because that doesn't help our bottom line. So if we design into the product a way for it to fail in some fashion, then that's how we can get customers coming back. And so that's what planned obsolescence is. It is horrible that this is a thing, but it's very frustrating as well.
It makes me so mad because I've had like my Apple laptop that I got as like a graduation gift years ago. I treated it so freaking well, and I did everything that I needed to do to like fix it myself, get it a new battery, never like consider buying a new one. And after like 7 years of owning it, it was freaking running amazing. But starting next year, I'm not going to be able to give it updates, like software updates for Apple, because after X amount of years, their old products don't get the new software updates, even though they are perfectly capable of getting the new software updates, which means all of my apps will stop working, and eventually the laptop will basically be like useless for a lot of stuff that I want to do outside of just like using the internet. And it's a shame because like I've done everything right to try to reduce my e-waste, but in the end, it's going to end up hopefully not becoming e-waste, but I'll have to create more waste and contribute to more of this ecological warfare by getting a new device because my old one is no longer working through no fault of its own.
Yep, that is planned obsolescence at its finest. Just even if the hardware is working really well, they got the software on you. That's how they get you. There's nothing you can do about it.
Freaking Apple.
So also in this World Economic Forum article, they mentioned that more than 44 million tons, TONNES, of e-waste was generated globally in 2017. That's 6 kilograms for every person on the planet. And of that, each year, around 80% of it is exported to Asia. One e-waste hub is the town of Guyu in China, where heaps of discarded computer parts piled by the river contaminate the water supply with cadmium, copper, and lead. Water samples show lead levels 190 times higher than the World Health Organization limits. Even a slight increase in lead levels, meanwhile, can affect IQ and academic performance in children. Other examples include the mass shipment of spent American batteries to Mexico, where illegal waste dumps from plants operated by American, European, and Japanese companies have resulted in soaring rates of anencephaly, which is when babies are born without brains. So e-waste, while specifically dealing with technology, does impact humanity. It impacts societies, it impacts communities. And there are real health hazards that come from this global situation of e-waste hubs around the world, in China, in countries in Africa, in Mexico. So when you think about what you can do, like we're thinking about Jake Sully in Avatar, he was put in this position where his brother dies and he suddenly finds himself on the planet of Pandora, and then he's working with scientists, and then the military guy comes in and try to get him, like he's trying to make all these decisions and working with all these different groups of people, but ultimately, it was making decisions for the Na'vi, the vulnerable population there, that he chose to side with. So as consumers, as people who are experiencing these issues, perhaps, we need to think about how our decisions impact the most vulnerable in our society, the people who don't have access to public policy makers, or don't have access to lobbyists, or don't have their own large global company that they're running, that they have sway in these conversations, right? So there are small things you do, like I mentioned, reusing the products that you have, recycling them, repairing them, waiting longer to buy a cell phone, or other things like clothes. There was a really great YouTube video I saw a couple of months ago about fast fashion and how that's doing ecological damage around the globe as well. So all of these different things sort of connect with each other. And I think it's important to be considerate of that as a consumer when you're thinking about your own technology usage. Well, that sums up this month's episode. We hope it gives you all something to think about.
Many things to think about. And as you may well know, at the end of every episode, we ask a trivia question related to something that we covered during our sci-fi analysis. So if you think you know the answer, send it to us in a tweet, or you can leave it as a comment in the video description below. The first person to get the answer will be included in our shout out next episode. Today's trivia question is, which CGI character convinced James Cameron that technology finally caught up with his vision for Avatar?
Think about it.
If you like this content, feel free to click that like or that subscribe button and share it with your friends.
And we'll see you next time for Sci-Fi in Real Life. Good night and good luck, humanity.